over to you.
Thank you, James, and the opportunity to present the Building Resilience Index. We know that if we can't measure something, it's very hard to reward it. It's very hard to incentivize it. So measuring resilience has been a key challenge for many years. And finally, we have something that has been developed by the World Bank, the International Finance Corp, that allows us to do exactly that. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, the two components of resilient buildings are first the physical integrity and second the operational continuity. I often ask people who are building, I ask them, who's your customer? And they say, well, it's the home buyer, or it's the a corporate owner, or some institutional owner, or the lessee, the people who are going to lease. And I say, your real customer is nature, and nature is the most demanding customer, because if they don't like your building, it's going to be destroyed. And they kind of open up their eyes and say, oh, I didn't know nature is my customer, but it's something we all need to realize. Next slide. So what is a BRI, the Building Resilience Index? Basically, it's a tool that it's a verified, and I'll explain what verified means, because obviously if it's not verified, it can't be reliable, but it's a self-assessment. The building assesses its mitigation measures. It's a rating, it's not a certification. So I'll explain what rating means. It can be performed for any building, from a small house to a big institutional facility, a multi-use building, government building. It's not for infrastructure, it's not for bridges or roads, but if you have an airport, the terminals can be rated, but not the runways, for example. And it really rates the mitigation measures, the hazard mitigation measures. It doesn't rate the hazards. It uses the hazard information, but it really rates what mitigation measures the building has for that location. Next slide. So the aim here was to create something that is both robust, because Mother Nature is a very tough customer, and it will destroy a building. We have ratings for green buildings, for other things, but nature never really tests those, so we don't know really how green or healthy or whatever they are. But when it comes to resilience, nature will apply its forces, and at some point we'll test it. But it also has to be easy to apply, which means we can't be conducting what I call a master's or PhD thesis for every building if we want to have a scale assessment. So it is a standardized assessment that is conservative in order to be robust, but has to be also easy to apply. Next slide. So IFC is the International Finance Corp. It's the private lending arm of the World Bank. The World Bank lends to governments, and IFC lends to the private sector in developing countries. They team up with other development banks, typically regional development banks, but also commercial banks. And IFC had, over a decade ago, developed a green index called EDGE, kind of a parallel to what's used in the US and perhaps Europe, called LEAD, but easier to use. It's been very successful. And they realized about 3 years ago they needed to develop something for resilience. And very smartly, in my opinion, instead of thinking they're going to build resilience into the green index, they realized that it needs to be a separate and parallel rating. And for a building to truly be sustainable, it has to be both green and resilient. I kind of, shake my head sometimes when people say, oh, I did all these green things, my building is sustainable, because I ask them, well, what if tomorrow it's totally destroyed? How sustainable is that? So they realize that, just being green is not truly sustainable. So IFC aimed to complement their index. And why is IFC interested in this, and why banks should be interested in this? Their security is the buildings. And that security traditionally has relied on insurance, but the lenders lend for 5, 10, 20, maybe more years, whereas the insurers can reprice and redecide on their policies every year. So just because you have insurance this year doesn't mean you're going to have insurance next year, or the price may be totally different. So the lenders are starting to realize that their true security is not the insurance policy, it's the resilience of the building. Next slide. Great. So how does a BRI relate to local codes? Because we know building is in most countries a regulated activity, and code compliance is a prerequisite for a BRI rating above the minimum. So we assume that the building has been built to code. But BRI really aims to go above code because most codes have been developed essentially for life safety. In other words, to give you enough time to get out of the building, not to enable the building to survive, to have something to get back in. So that's kind of the low standard that we've all accepted as kind of the industry practice. Codes let you get out, but you may not have something to get back in there. But BRI aims to both, obviously, ensure that safety is protected through the codes, but also that there's a building there that you can return. And BRI, as I mentioned earlier, is conservative. So we are going above the code. Obviously, there's climate threats that are happening and will be happening. So BRI is setting a higher level, probably of where codes will be 5, 10, 20 years from now. That's probably where BRI is pointing us toward. The next slide, please. So what are the different ratings in the BRI system here? At the very top is what we call global best practices. It's the best of the best that has been practically applied somewhere in the world. For example, we looked at Japan's seismic codes that have been practiced for decades and said, okay, they're doing the right things there, and it's proven to survive. And in fact, a number of the hospitals that survived the earthquakes in Turkey had some of what the Japanese have been prescribing. And so that our expert panel that was assembled under IFC kind of cataloged these global best practices, and we said that's a AA level. At the very bottom there is what we call weak practices or unpermitted development that we see in many developing countries, and we know those for certain will be destroyed sooner or later. And then you have kind of the minimal practices where most codes typically are, and above that stronger practices. So if you looked at most of the building stock today, even in developed countries, it's going to be at the B and NR level. Very few are at the A and AA. And our initial goal here is to stop NR construction and retrofit as many NRs into B. Being a B is a major success. So don't underestimate that because an NR is a sure disaster. And on top of that, the rating adds a plus designation to the letter for operational continuity measures that I'll mention later in the case study. The next slide, please. So why a rating? Basically, the responsibility for the building, the legal responsibility, remains with the owners and their professional team. The BRI rating is relative. In other words, we know that the AA mitigation measures are better than the A, better than the B, and definitely better than the NR. We don't know exactly how much better, and we will see over time how these buildings perform that are differently rated, but we know we are moving in the right direction, going higher up. And obviously, in a very litigious environment, the construction is, IFC want to make sure that the responsibility really remains with the building owner and their professional team. Next slide, please. So basically, the tool has 3 major components. One is incorporating the hazard knowledge. So if you put the address of the building, the tool will tell you these are the hazards you need to be looking at. And that's that data is being incorporated into the database for many countries. It hasn't been completed. So if a country does not yet have that information, this can be done manually too. You can manually assess the hazard for that location. The second part, which I mentioned earlier, is the mitigation knowledge. That has been completed. The mitigation measures have been cataloged into the tool and have been organized, which are required for the B level, the A, and the AA level. And third is the information of the building that the building has to input. And this information has to be verified by 2 locally registered engineers or building professionals. So if a building says, yes, I have this measure, I am rated for X kilometers per hour wind, I've been designed and built for that. These verifiers have to verify that by checking the information. And on that verification is what IFC relies on to provide the rating for the building. Next slide, please. So as we've mentioned several times here, the hazards are site-specific. The hazards are organized into 4 major categories. And in a lot of the insurance data kind of points that, say, over 85% of the economic losses are due to these 4 categories: wind, water, fire, and geoseismic. Under these categories are various hazard types. The upper level there, that's kind of enveloped in the red line, is what we call default hazards. They apply to any location. Any location can have downbursts or local fires or just urban floods, even deserts we know can flood. And then there are more geographic specific hazards. Some are macro geographic, like earthquake prone areas and tsunami or hurricane prone areas. Other are micro geographic, like flash flooding. It depends on the local terrain. So all these hazards are considered in BRI. Next slide. Another thing with BRI being conservative is that it provides a rating for each hazard category based on the mitigation measures that the building has. But the overall rating of the building is the lowest of the four, which we call the weakest link principle, meaning that Mother Nature will eventually find your weakest point and damage or destroy you there. So we want the building to focus on what it can do to improve that weakest link. And the application is totally open, totally transparent. You can see what you don't have, what you need to have to go to the next level. There's no black box here, and it's free, by the way, other than paying for the verifiers. So, you know, this is another component in the conservative nature of BRI. Next slide. So just a quick feel of, you know, the mitigation measures. There are about 73, 74 total mitigation measures. Obviously, all of them will not apply everywhere. It depends on the location. Some of them are location specific, like how close you are to a urban wildland interface, you know, that we're concerned about now, you know, seeing the fires in California. That's a factor there too. If you're too close, you cannot be above a certain level. Some are structural, based on the design and construction of the building, most of them, and some are related to inspections that need to have been performed during the construction of that building. Next slide. Just a quick feel here, because I'm not going to delve into this. There's a complete manual and training provided for BRI to interested professionals. But, you know, just an idea, if you're in a hurricane area, what the wind levels, if you're below 200 kilometer per hour speed design, you're an NR, you're certainly headed for destruction. And to be at the AA, you need to be reinforced concrete, which is the global best practice in southern Florida that we applied. Various elevations, this is for non-tsunami areas. Tsunamis are higher than this. If you're below 3 meters, for example, from not just a sea, but a lake, a river, a creek, even if it's a dry creek that could flash flood, you're considered an NR. Your first used floor, occupied floor, has to be at least 3 meters. And that's above most of what codes provide today. You know, codes are really lagging in the water side of resilience. Codes have done a better job in fire, so a lot of the fire standards are typically met by the codes, and obviously, you know, wherever the code is stronger, you have less to do to go to that higher rating level. And finally, you have earthquake-related measures here, with seismic base isolation being the best global practice that's applied in Japan, and BRI requires it for buildings over 3 stories. And this was existing in those hospitals that survived in Turkey. Next slide. So just a summary of the terms. It's free and open source. The rating itself is valid for 10 years, or could be triggered a re-rating earlier if there's a major event, like a major hazard event that destroyed part of the building, a major innovation that includes structural changes or change of use. It's a rating, not a certification, and it's verified on site. The verifiers have to visit the facility, and it's not a desktop verification, by 2 locally registered building professionals that are trained and provided a license by IFC. Next slide. So BRI was launched a couple of years ago, and it was first launched in the Philippines, which we know has all the major hazard categories, but also has a very resilient, sensitive culture with both the private sector, business, people, government, very interested in resilience. So it was launched there, and the private sector there is committed to rating over 2 million square meters of buildings over the next 6-7 years. But it's been expanded, being launched in Vietnam, tested in India, being launched in southern countries of Africa, and also in Central America, the Caribbean, and Colombia. And IFC's goal, obviously, is to make it global. Support by IFC will be provided to the developing countries, but other organizations, my own nonprofit, will provide training in North America and Europe to engineers and professionals who are interested. And you can get more information at the website resilienceindex.org. Next slide. So with that, I thank you, and back to you, James.
Thanks, Aris. And I think your last slide there, looking at the global coverage, answers one of the questions that we had pop up, which was about global coverage of BRI. But yeah, really, absolutely fascinating and great to have some benchmark information. I remember the World Bank used to do their Doing Better Business Index until a few years ago, after I think several countries were gaming it, so they decided to remove it, but was very, very useful information about all kinds of different things. So we move on to the next question.